If you were the most wanted cybercriminal on Earth with a $5 million bounty on your head, the last thing you should be doing is cruising the streets in a $250,000 camo-wrapped Lamborghini with a vanity plate that reads, "Thief." But that's precisely what Maxim Yakubets was doing while cybercrime units around the world were hunting him. But who is this mysterious hacker, and how did his criminal enterprise, which he actually named Evil Corp, manage to steal over $300 million without Maxim ever getting arrested? This is the story of a Russian hacker who rose from obscurity to become the most brazen and wanted cybercriminal in history. Maxim wasn't born rich. He didn't inherit a fortune or have allies in the halls of power. But he was clever and had a passion for computer programming. And he was fearless. In less than a decade, this elusive hacker, who goes by the online alias Aqua, built the most notorious cybercrime syndicate in history. A global hacking empire that's stolen more than $300 million since 2014. His evolution from a small-time thief operating out of a Moscow cafe to the most wanted cybercriminal on Earth is nothing short of mind-blowing. Little is known about Maxim's early years, aside from his birth on May 20, 1987, in Polonna, Ukraine, when the country was still part of the Soviet Union. It's also alleged that Maxim's father worked as a money launderer for cybercriminals, which may be how his son got into hacking. We do know that by the time he was in his late teens, Maxim was living in Russia and spending his days in Moscow's internet cafes, studying the art of financial fraud, phishing, and malware development. His skill was undeniable, and combined with his larger-than-life personality, it was only a matter of time before Maxim caught the attention of Yevgeny Bogachev, a notorious Russian cybercriminal. If Maxim is the flashy Lambo-driving face of Russian cybercrime, Bogachev is the elusive man behind the curtain who taught him how to run the game. Operating under the online aliases Lucky12345 and Slavic, Bogachev gained infamy as the creator of Zeus, one of the most destructive malware programs in history. Between 2009 and 2011, Bogachev used a later variant of the virus, Game Over Zeus, to steal over $100 million. Working for Bogachev's hacking collective, the Business Club, Maxim proved he wasn't just a nerdy hacker, but a natural leader and gifted organizer. Under Bogachev, Maxim successfully recruited hundreds of hackers while managing complex networks of money handlers and running sophisticated cyber scams on an international scale. Whatever hacking skills Maxim possessed before Moscow likely paled in comparison to what he learned from Bogachev. However, using computers to rob banks is far from the only illegal activity in which the Business Club was involved. Bogachev was also a Kremlin asset who used his malware for espionage against the US and NATO. It's a side hustle that didn't go unnoticed by his protege Maxim. For 5 years, Maxim flourished as a hacker for the Business Club, but he found Bogachev annoying and abrasive on a personal level. In a text exchange with a fellow hacker, Maxim wrote that Bogachev was a bitch who annoyed the hell out of everyone and that the group could do better. By 2014, Maxim had his fill of working for someone else. So when the authorities shut down the Business Club's Game Over Zeus, he knew it was time to branch out on his own. Within months of splitting from Bogachev, 27-year-old Maxim had used what he learned from the Business Club to lay the foundation for his own criminal empire, which he would call Evil Corp. The name wasn't subtle, but neither was Maxim. In June 2014, the company set up the domain ev17corp.biz, and Evil Corp was born. Maxim recruited and ran a squad of top-tier Russian cybercriminals who specialized in infiltrating financial institutions. The gang quickly established itself as a major player by creating Dridex, a computer virus delivered through phishing email campaigns. The emails tricked recipients into opening infected attachments. Once Dridex was installed, it stole banking information, which Evil Corp used to access and drain bank accounts. This business model wasn't complex. but it was ingenious and highly effective. In fact, Dridex was so successful that in less than 2 years, it became one of the most destructive financial malware strains in history. Evil Corp sent out 15,000 phishing emails daily, infecting thousands of computers. By 2016, Dridex had stolen over $100 million from more than 300 financial institutions across 40 countries. Everyone was fair game. No one was safe. The hackers targeted schools, private companies, government agencies, and even religious organizations. A small Pittsburgh oil company lost $3.5 million through wire transfers initiated by Evil Corp. An assisted living facility run by Catholic nuns in Chicago was also hacked. Like any criminal organization, Evil Corp didn't care who the victims were. However, unlike other cybercriminals who prefer anonymity, Evil Corp brought the structure of a Fortune 500 company and the swagger of a street gang. Maxim was running a global crime syndicate with a corporate structure, a payroll system, and even team vacations. The company operated out of high-end rental offices in Moscow, where criminal programmers punched a clock like employees at legitimate tech companies. Maxim recruited a dozen teams to fill specific roles in managing Dridex and laundering stolen money. When they weren't stealing millions from their high-end offices in Moscow, Maxim and his crew could be found racing their luxury cars through the city and flaunting their wealth. Maxim was living like an emperor, but maintaining that lifestyle would require a bit of innovation. Like all successful CEOs, Maxim knew Evil Corp had to grow or it would die. So he decided to branch out. Instead of simply stealing money, Maxim began encrypting entire networks and demanding ransom payments in cryptocurrency. Evil Corp began exploring entirely new cybercrime techniques, and ransomware attacks were just the beginning. Ransomware as a service became a huge revenue stream, with Evil Corp leasing their malware to other bad actors. The company contracted out its ransomware for an upfront hefty payment of $100,000 and 50% of all revenues, with a minimum of $50,000 a week in earnings. Evil Corp even branched out into corporate espionage, stealing proprietary business data and selling it to the highest bidder.
We're here today to identify and announce charges against a Russian national whom the Department of Justice alleges is responsible for two of the worst computer hacking and bank fraud schemes of the past decade. Yakubets is a...
These criminal activities attracted mounting attention from the FBI and the UK's National Crime Agency, NCA, as well as dozens of cybersecurity firms across the globe. It seemed as if every cyber cop on Earth was hunting Maxim, but no law enforcement agency had ever been able to get close to him. And why wasn't Russia cracking down on one of the most notorious cyber gangs in the world? Was it because Evil Corp continued to adapt and evolve into new versions of itself, just like its malware? Was Maxim just that good at hiding his tracks? Or were there other forces shielding Evil Corp? And just as importantly, what was Maxim doing with all that money? Most cybercriminals live in the shadows, hiding behind encrypted servers, burner phones, and layers of anonymity. But Maxim isn't like most cybercriminals. While the FBI, Interpol, the NCA, and countless cybersecurity agencies were hunting him, Maxim was living like a Russian oligarch. The Evil Corp CEO burned through his stolen millions while flaunting his wealth like a gangster in a Hollywood film. First, there's the $250,000 camouflage-wrapped Lamborghini Huracan that Maxim uses to do donuts around Moscow's cops. It's one of many luxury cars he owns, but the only one with a license plate that reads "Thief" in Russian. Instead of dogs or cats for pets like most people, Maxim wanted apex predators, so he bought lion and tiger cubs to raise. It's rumored that Maxim and his Evil Corp hackers spend millions of dollars in spa vacations and company retreats. Then there's his wedding to Alyona Bendersky, which was estimated to have cost $500,000. Whatever the cost, marrying the daughter of a retired Russian intelligence officer would prove a wise investment. Similar to the Italian mafia in the United States, part of what kept Maxim protected was that he had plenty of family watching his back and his money. In addition to having his father help with money laundering, Evil Corp employed Maxim's brother and 2 cousins as money handlers and fund managers. Having trusted family members involved in the operations protected Maxim. But it's Maxim's father-in-law who is perhaps most responsible for the authorities turning a blind eye to Evil Corp. In his younger years, Maxim's father-in-law, Edward Bendersky, was an officer in the Vimepol, one of the Russian security service's most feared and secretive units. Operating as a division of the Federal Security Service, FSB, the Vimepol took over the work of the infamous KGB. In addition to carrying out sabotage and assassinations for the government, the Vimepol was responsible for protecting Russia from foreign threats. Edward allegedly retired from the FSB and entered the private sector, building a network of private security and paramilitary firms. But no one ever really leaves the FSB. It is believed that Edward's businesses have been used to carry out multiple overseas assassinations for the Russian regime. The Kremlin trusts Edward, and with that trust comes certain privileges, like turning a blind eye to his son-in-law's criminal activities. But does the Kremlin simply ignore Maxim's cybercrimes as a favor to Edward, or are there other reasons for keeping the hacker out of prison? Officially, the FSB is tasked with guarding Russia from foreign threats. Unofficially, it has long been linked to organized crime, cyber warfare, and covert operations against the West. So, the notion that the Russian government wouldn't utilize an asset as valuable as Maxim to weaken its enemies abroad is unrealistic, if not entirely unbelievable. In fact, by 2017, US intelligence confirmed that Maxim was actively working for the FSB, employing his hacking skills for cyber espionage against NATO and other Western targets. Maxim wasn't simply being shielded by his father-in-law. He was earning his protection by moonlighting for Russian intelligence. Stealing hundreds of millions will surely put you on law enforcement's radar. However, attacking American and British security interests for Russian intelligence is what finally put a target on Maxim Yakubets' back with the US State Department. And no amount of protection from the FSB could completely insulate Maxim and Evil Corp from Uncle Sam's long reach. For years, Maxim and his gang operated like a digital mafia, stealing over $300 million while taunting international law enforcement with their lavish lifestyle and brazen attacks. For most criminals, arrogance and recklessness leads to decades-long prison sentences. However, so long as Maxim remains in Russia, he will be protected. So law enforcement has to get creative and tough. On December 5, 2019, the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed a massive indictment against Maxim and Evil Corp. He was formally charged with bank fraud, wire fraud, computer hacking, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. The U.S. State Department also placed a record-breaking $5 million bounty on Maxim's head. Ironically, the previous record of a $3 million reward for the arrest of a cybercriminal belonged to Maxim's old mentor, Bogachev. The goal was simple: cripple Evil Corp's operations and pressure Russia into handing over Maxim. But the plan had one big flaw. Russia had no intention of arresting him. Instead, Maxim continues to live like a king and ply his trade with impunity. The sanctions only made it slightly harder for Evil Corp to move the money they've continued to steal. By 2024, it became clear that previous efforts by law enforcement hadn't been aggressive enough and that more needed to be done. On January 9, 2024, the US, UK, and Australian governments announced a coordinated cyber offensive against Evil Corp. The goal wasn't simply to slow the gang down this time, but to completely dismantle their operations and cut Evil Corp off from the global financial system. In addition to publicly naming key Evil Corp members through indictments, the US seized the company's cryptocurrency wallets and bank accounts. The Australian government cracked down on ransomware payments, making it difficult for companies to pay off the hackers. Further sanctions banned US and European companies from doing business with Evil Corp or any entity linked to them, intentionally or otherwise. This prohibited companies or individuals from avoiding penalties by claiming they didn't know who they were working with. But would any of it ultimately make a difference? Sanctions undoubtedly hurt Evil Corp by severely restricting the cybercriminals' access to their stolen funds, but they failed to stop their operations completely. Instead, the gang rebranded and went back to work. New ransomware strains such as Wasted Locker, Hades, and Phoenix Locker have all been linked to Evil Corp, but operate under different names. The company has also moved away from traditional banking and now deals almost exclusively in crypto, making it harder for law enforcement to track its ill-gotten gains. Whatever iteration it's taking these days, Evil Corp is up and running and raking in millions of dollars for Maxim and his friends. For now, Maxim is still roaming free and living comfortably in Moscow under the protection of the Russian government. He is a living symbol of how cybercriminals can become too valuable to arrest because Maxim isn't just a hacker and a thief. He's also an intelligence asset and a member of Russia's elite. But his world is getting smaller. His fortunes are fading, his criminal network is under constant attack, and the walls will continue to close in. So, will Maxim ever be arrested? Probably not. Russia doesn't cooperate with Western law enforcement and has never handed over a cybercriminal to the US. They're not likely to start now with one of their most valuable assets. However, that's not to say that someone outside the government couldn't be persuaded by the $5 million bounty. And the political pressure to bring Maxim justice continues to mount. If he ever leaves Russia, he will be immediately arrested and extradited. But he lives like a king in Moscow, so he will never leave on his own. So, perhaps the question isn't whether Maxim will ever be caught. It's whether Russia will ever decide he's no longer worth protecting. In today's world, it isn't just corporations that get hacked, but also individuals. Countless individuals get hacked and have their identities stolen without ever knowing it. We've put together a free guide you can use to determine if you've been hacked and how to protect yourself in as little as 5 minutes. Click the first link in the description to gain instant access.